living there?
Yeah, Lauren was my neighbor. We're just trying to find out where she is at this point. I mean, no one has seen her since Saturday. I mean, the last time anyone heard from her was an email that she sent out, and no one's heard from her since.
Why is it that everything that we get from you is yes, no, or I don't know?
I don't know.
What are you going to say tomorrow when I say we got your hair with the body? Look at all that on your head. You don't think nothing fell out? It did. Your hair is there. Your hair is there, man.
June 26, 2011, Macon, Georgia. While the city slept in the early morning hours, something terrible was happening on the second floor of Barristers Hall, an apartment complex built exclusively for law students. Lauren Giddings, a 27-year-old recent graduate, was about to become the victim of one of the most disturbing crimes the state of Georgia had ever witnessed. But what made this case truly shocking wasn't just the brutality of the crime, it was the identity of the killer. Because the person responsible wasn't some stranger who broke into her home. He was her neighbor, a fellow law student, someone who possessed a key that opened every door in the building. And he had been watching Lauren for far longer than anyone could have imagined. 10 years have passed since Lauren Giddings walked into her apartment for the last time. 10 years since a law student, days away from starting her dream career, vanished without a trace. But what police discovered when they finally found her shocked even the most seasoned investigators. This wasn't a crime of passion. This wasn't a random act of violence. This was something far more calculated and far more disturbing. To understand how police caught one of the most methodical killers in Georgia history, it's necessary to go back a few days earlier. Lauren had just graduated from Mercer University School of Law, one of the oldest law schools in the United States. At 27 years old, she had her entire future ahead of her. She was preparing for the Georgia bar exam, planning to marry her partner David, and was days away from moving to Atlanta to begin her career as a public defender. Lauren lived in Barristers Hall, apartment number 2, a complex located directly across from campus. It was supposed to be safe, exclusive, a place where future lawyers could focus on their studies without worry. But in the days leading up to June 26th, Lauren had confided in her sister about something disturbing. She felt like someone was coming into her apartment. Things were being moved around. The energy felt wrong. She couldn't prove it, but she was convinced someone was watching her. On June 25th, late in the evening, she sent an email to David expressing her fears. He reassured her it was probably nothing, just stress from studying for the bar exam. The next day, Lauren Giddings sent out a mass message to friends and family. It read, "I'm hunkering down to study for the bar. Please don't be offended if I don't respond to texts or emails." After that, silence. When Lauren's best friend Katie and her sister Caitlin couldn't reach her for several days, they knew something was wrong. This wasn't like her. Even when studying intensely, Lauren always responded eventually. On June 30th, Caitlin called a fellow student named Ashley and asked her to check on Lauren. Ashley and her boyfriend drove to Barristers Hall. Lauren's car was still parked outside. Using a spare key, they entered apartment number 2. Inside, they found Lauren's purse, her law books, her cell phone, her laptop. Everything she would need if she'd left voluntarily was still there. But Lauren was nowhere to be found. The consensus among friends was that the last time anyone had confirmed contact with her was 4 days earlier, at an end-of-year party. She'd left the morning after and everything seemed fine. But now, with her belongings untouched and her move-out date scheduled for the very next day, panic set in. The following morning, police were called to Barristers Hall. What they found when they arrived would turn a missing person case into one of the most chilling murder investigations Georgia had ever seen. Before diving into what investigators discovered in that apartment, if you're interested in cases where the truth was hidden in plain sight, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications for Classified crimes. Because this case reveals something terrifying, sometimes the person you should fear most is the one living right next door. And what police found that day would expose a predator who had been watching, waiting, and planning for far longer than anyone imagined. When officers arrived at apartment number 2 on the morning of June 30th, they immediately noted no signs of forced entry, no signs of a struggle, and nothing appeared to have been stolen. But something was definitely wrong. Investigators began processing the scene systematically. They used luminol spray to check for traces of blood throughout the apartment. Room after room came up clean, until they reached Lauren's bathroom. When the luminol reacted with the surface of her bathtub, the entire fixture lit up under the UV light. The bath had clearly been full of blood. At that moment, investigators knew they were no longer searching for a missing woman. They were searching for a body. It was a hot day with a strong breeze. As police stood outside the building near the trash collection area, formulating their next steps, a gust of wind carried something unmistakable in their direction. The smell of human decomposition. One officer would later recall that we all smell things in life that smell bad, but the smell of a decomposing body is one of the worst things you'll ever encounter. They opened the lids of the dumpsters near the building's entrance. Inside one of them, wrapped in a black plastic bag, was a female torso. No head, no arms, no legs, just a torso. Testing would soon confirm what investigators already suspected. It was Lauren Giddings. And in a twisted stroke of fate, if police vehicles hadn't been blocking the entrance that morning, the trash removal service would have already emptied those dumpsters. Lauren's remains would have been gone forever. The chief medical examiner would later confirm there were no signs of sexual assault, but could not determine an exact cause of death due to the condition of the remains. However, based on the evidence in the bathroom and the state of the body, they believed Lauren had been killed and dismembered on June 26th, the same day she'd sent that email about feeling watched. Investigators knew they had to move carefully. If the killer was someone in the complex, they couldn't alert them to what had been found. They needed to interview everyone, search every apartment, and look for any sign of who could have done this. The people who had participated in the initial search for Lauren were brought in for questioning first. Ashley, her ex-boyfriend Joe, other friends and neighbors. Lauren's partner David was also interviewed, but he was quickly ruled out. He had been on a golfing trip in California when Lauren disappeared, and his alibi was airtight. He was devastated. Her ex-boyfriend Joe was similarly cleared. As investigators worked methodically through the complex, asking each resident for permission to search their apartments, everyone agreed. Everyone except one person. 25-year-old Steven McDaniel, a fellow law student, and Lauren's next-door neighbor in apartment number 4. When asked why he wouldn't consent to a search, he said it was the lawyer in him, that he was always protective of his space. This immediately raised red flags, but what made it even more suspicious was his behavior throughout the day. Steven McDaniel had been one of the first people to join the search for Lauren when she went missing. He'd walked around the complex with her friends, asking questions, offering theories. But now that police had arrived, his demeanor had changed completely. He refused to help with the search of his own apartment, yet he stayed at the scene all day, watching everything police were doing, following them, loitering, making sure he knew exactly what was happening. And when local news crews arrived to cover the story, Steven McDaniel was one of the first people to approach them for an interview. What happened next would become one of the most chilling pieces of footage in true crime history. A reporter asked Steven about Lauren's disappearance. He spoke freely, offering his theories about what might have happened to his neighbor. He explained that Lauren was a nice person, very personable. He noted that her door had been locked when friends arrived, and there were no signs of forced entry. Then the reporter asked about the parking lot area, noting they had been doing a lot of work there. Steven's response was telling. He said they didn't know if it was the same person, that they had taken out a body there earlier, but they didn't know if it was the same person or not. The reporter looked confused and asked if he was okay. Steven McDaniel's face had gone completely pale. He said he needed to sit down. Here's what made this moment so significant. At that point, only a handful of people knew that a body had been found in the dumpster. The discovery hadn't been made public yet. It hadn't been confirmed to residents. So how did Steven McDaniel know about the body? The reporter pressed further, asking if he had heard anything about a body. Steven stammered that he hadn't, that as far as any arrest, they were still just trying to find her. But he'd already said too much. For the next several minutes, Steven sat in silence, staring into space, completely dissociated from his surroundings. The camera captured him frozen, barely moving, processing what he'd just revealed. Investigators watching this interview knew immediately this was their suspect. Hours later, Steven McDaniel finally allowed police to search his apartment. What they found inside was deeply disturbing. The apartment was filled with stockpiles of food and energy drinks. Multiple weapons were scattered throughout, and in various drawers, investigators found items that didn't belong to him, including condoms. When police pulled them out, Steven made an odd comment about being a virgin and saving himself for marriage. He mentioned being on the dating site eHarmony, but having no luck getting dates. Then, unprompted, Steven admitted something shocking. He had broken into 2 neighboring apartments and randomly stolen the condoms. With his own admission that he'd been breaking into other people's homes just feet away from where Lauren lived, police arrested him immediately for burglary and brought him in for questioning. During the interview, detectives noticed something unusual about Steven McDaniel. He sat almost perfectly still, barely moving, barely blinking. When asked to look investigators in the eye, he would do so briefly, then return to staring straight ahead. His responses were robotic. Yes, no, I don't know. When shown a photo of Lauren and asked what he thought happened to her, he simply said he didn't know. Detectives had interviewed hundreds of suspects over their careers. They'd never seen anyone respond this way. Even when left alone in the interrogation room, Steven remained frozen in the same position, staring at nothing, exhibiting no normal human behavior. Meanwhile, investigators continued processing his apartment, and what they found would seal his fate. Investigators discovered that Steven McDaniel somehow possessed a master key that could open every apartment in Barrister's Hall, including Lauren's. This explained how someone had been entering her apartment without forcing the door. Lauren's instincts had been correct all along. Someone had been coming in, watching her, moving her things, and that someone was Steven McDaniel. In Steven's apartment, police found packaging for a hacksaw. The actual saw was missing. A search of the maintenance room in the complex revealed the hacksaw itself, covered in blood. Testing confirmed it was Lauren's blood. Security footage showed Steven purchasing this exact hacksaw at a local hardware store just days before Lauren's murder. The maintenance worker had already been cleared, and the only other person with access to the locked maintenance room was Steven McDaniel. Hidden among Steven's belongings, investigators found a pair of women's underwear. DNA testing confirmed it belonged to Lauren Giddings. Steven would later try to explain this away, claiming he'd stolen it just like he'd stolen the condoms from neighbors. But the evidence painted a far more sinister picture. When investigators analyzed the flash drives and computer hard drives seized from Steven's apartment, they uncovered a horrifying pattern of behavior. His search history revealed constant surveillance of Lauren's social media profiles. He would search her name dozens of times per day, often while simultaneously viewing violent pornography. They found blog posts he'd written about torturing and killing women, sharing graphic fantasies on anonymous forums, and they found images and videos that resulted in 30 additional charges of child sexual exploitation. But perhaps the most chilling discovery was a video Steven had recorded on the very night Lauren was murdered. On a memory card taken from Steven's apartment, investigators found footage that proved he'd been stalking Lauren for an extended period. The video showed Lauren's apartment window, filmed from outside. Steven had constructed a makeshift surveillance device, a wooden pole with a camera duct taped to the end. He would extend this pole up to Lauren's window, angling it to see through her blinds into her private spaces. The footage was recorded late at night on June 26, 2011, the same night Lauren Giddings was murdered. When prosecutor David Cook saw this video, he knew immediately that was the guy. Steven's final computer searches before Lauren's death were equally damning. He had researched Macon's trash collection schedule and pickup times with precision. He needed to know exactly when the dumpsters would be emptied, because he needed to know how long he had before Lauren's body would be discovered. As more evidence was uncovered, detectives brought Steven McDaniel back in for additional questioning. Detective Patterson confronted him directly, pointing out that he had gotten on the news and given a media report that her mother saw, that he stood out there and ran his mouth to the news media, but now he didn't know anything. Steven remained motionless, emotionless. When asked why he wouldn't be honest, he replied flatly that he was being honest. When asked if he hurt Lauren, he said no. When asked what he did to her, he said he didn't do anything. But investigators knew better. The physical evidence was overwhelming. Steven McDaniel had killed Lauren Giddings, dismembered her body, and attempted to dispose of the evidence. The question wasn't whether he'd done it. The question was why. Classmates at Mercer Law School described Steven McDaniel as uncomfortable to be around, awkward, difficult to talk to. He would ask people disturbing questions about death, fixating on zombie apocalypses and discussing how to commit the perfect murder. He would quiz fellow students on how they would hypothetically kill someone and get away with it. In school, Steven had actually been voted most likely to be famous, but his fellow law students said he clearly thought he was the smartest person in any room. He was arrogant, always ready for a debate even when he was completely wrong. He would argue with everyone, including Lauren, over the smallest details. One classmate recalled that he wasn't there to make friends. That was clear. Professors said Steven was an average student at best. He didn't stand out academically, though he certainly spoke as if he did. As he approached graduation, Steven McDaniel found himself adrift with no friends, no job prospects, no clear future. From the moment they became neighbors in 2008, Lauren had tried to be friendly with Steven. She was the kind of person who made an effort with everyone, even people others found difficult. She introduced him to her mother, Karen, when they crossed paths at the complex. Karen would later recall thinking there was something about him that felt off. His windows and curtains were always closed. You never saw him outside. But Lauren, being kind-hearted, continued trying to include Steven in social activities. The problem was, Steven had developed feelings for Lauren that she didn't reciprocate. He asked her out on dates multiple times. Each time, she politely declined. She was in a relationship with David, and even if she weren't, she simply wasn't interested in Steven in that way. In an email Lauren sent to David back in 2008, she mentioned butting heads with Steven in class and joked that he gave her the stink eye. She wrote that he was out to get her. At the time, it seemed like harmless student rivalry, but Lauren's instincts were telling her something her logical mind didn't want to accept. Steven McDaniel was dangerous, and she was right. On August 2, 2011, Steven McDaniel was formally charged with the murder of Lauren Giddings. He was also charged with 7 counts of child sexual exploitation, which would later increase to 30 counts as more evidence was analyzed. When his lawyers requested bail be set at $100,000, the judge set it at nearly $1 million instead. The case seemed headed for trial. The prosecution was confident in their evidence, despite the fact that much of it was circumstantial. They couldn't prove an exact cause or time of death. Steven's DNA wasn't found in Lauren's bathroom or on the hacksaw itself, but the totality of the evidence was damning. The prosecution announced they would seek the death penalty. Interestingly, one of Steven's defense attorneys had been one of Lauren's professors during law school. He remembered her well and recalled that Lauren had been strongly opposed to the death penalty on principle. For nearly 3 years, the case moved slowly through the court system. Then, in April 2014, just 1 week before trial was scheduled to begin, Steven McDaniel's legal team advised him to accept a plea deal. The prosecution agreed to drop the child exploitation charges and remove the death penalty from consideration. In exchange, Steven would plead guilty to murder and provide a detailed written account of what happened the night Lauren died. Steven McDaniel accepted the deal. After nearly 3 years of silence, he was finally ready to tell the truth, or at least his version of it. As part of his plea agreement, Steven McDaniel wrote a detailed allocution describing exactly what he did to Lauren Giddings. According to his account, at approximately 4:30 in the morning on June 26, 2011, he unlocked Lauren's apartment door using his master key. He was dressed entirely in black, wearing gloves and a mask. He entered her apartment and stood in her bedroom watching her sleep. Lauren must have sensed something was wrong because she woke up abruptly. Before she could get out of bed or process what was happening, Steven leapt onto her and placed his hands around her throat. The pair struggled and fell from the bed onto the floor. During the struggle, Lauren grabbed Steven's mask and pulled it off. When she saw it was him, her neighbor, her classmate, she called his name and screamed at him to stop. She cried. She fought back. She tried to escape. For nearly 15 minutes, Steven strangled Lauren Giddings while she begged him to stop. Finally, she stopped breathing. Steven dragged her body into the bathroom and placed it in the bathtub. He left her there for the rest of that night and the following day. On the evening of June 27th, he returned to her apartment with tools, including the hacksaw he'd purchased. He proceeded to dismember her body, describing the process in graphic detail in his written confession. He placed different parts of her body in separate bags, which he claimed to have dumped in various locations around the university campus. Her torso, however, he placed in the dumpster next to the apartment complex, believing it would be collected quickly by the trash service. He cut up his mask, gloves, and shirt and flushed them down the toilet, attempting to destroy the evidence. The medical examiner confirmed there were no signs of sexual assault, and Steven stated in his confession that he did not sexually assault Lauren, that she was wearing pink running shorts when she died, and he never removed them. They were found on her torso, just as he had left them. When asked to explain why he killed Lauren, Steven offered vague explanations about being in a dreamlike, delusional state and suggested that something in his makeup, his psychology, his neuropathy, his own particular pathology, must explain his actions. He claimed he convinced himself afterwards that Lauren was still alive. He told the court he was sorry and that he grieves for Lauren every day but doesn't expect forgiveness. He said if he could take back what happened, he would. But investigators have never believed this was the whole truth. Detective David Patterson would later state that he was sure there were things Steven would never tell anyone. Lauren's sister Sarah echoed this sentiment, saying they didn't really believe anything Steven McDaniel said, that she didn't think he was a very honest person, that he had a very vivid imagination. Before sentencing, the prosecution presented additional evidence of Steven McDaniel's character. They showed the surveillance video he'd recorded of Lauren's apartment. They read excerpts from alleged forum posts where Steven described violent fantasies, including one disturbing post about killing a female neighbor after graduation. However, the authenticity of some of these posts remains disputed, with some claiming they were written by trolls impersonating him online. Lauren's mother, Karen Giddings, addressed the court, saying that Steven McDaniel was a psychopath who cowardly allowed darkness and evil to consume him, that he should never be permitted to prowl the streets of this world again. The prosecution noted that the only reason they had agreed to drop the death penalty was because Lauren herself had been so strongly opposed to capital punishment. Her family wanted to honor her beliefs, even in these circumstances. They hoped instead that Steven McDaniel would live a long life in the worst possible conditions behind bars. On April 1, 2014, Steven McDaniel was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole until 2041. He would be 55 years old before he could even be considered for release. And legal experts believe he will die in prison long before that day comes. Steven McDaniel has never accepted responsibility for his actions, despite his guilty plea. From prison, he has filed multiple appeals claiming he was the victim of police intimidation, that evidence was planted, and that his defense attorneys were incompetent. In a handwritten letter, he complained that detectives yelled at him during interrogation and wouldn't even let him go to the restroom without permission. He claimed he suffered a seizure from stress and was denied medical care unless he allowed police to search his apartment. In 2018, 4 years after his conviction, Steven represented himself in an appeal hearing, calling more than 10 witnesses, including his former attorney, Floyd Buford. Steven waived attorney-client privilege, allowing Buford to speak freely about their discussions. Buford's testimony was damning. He said that up until the last couple weeks of the case, he was strongly in Steven's corner. But then came the graphic, specific, detailed confession, combined with the internet searches about having sex with dead people and the most horrific child pornographic photos he'd ever seen. All of that created an evidentiary problem they couldn't overcome. He reminded Steven that he started off facing a death penalty and ended up with the possibility of parole one day, that he could get out one day. The appeal was denied. In 2022, Steven filed another appeal claiming prosecutorial misconduct, violation of his rights, and attorney incompetence. He requested his conviction be overturned and that he be released from prison. His father, Mark McDaniel, supported the appeal, saying they were hoping that the truth would come out. But the judge ruled that Steven had filed the appeal over a year past the deadline and refused to even consider it. The appeal was denied. Steven McDaniel has filed yet another appeal, which is currently ongoing. Some members of his family still believe in his innocence, though public support has been virtually non-existent. Despite Steven McDaniel's confession and conviction, critical questions remain unanswered. Only Lauren's torso was ever recovered. Steven claimed he disposed of her head, arms, and legs in various dumpsters around the university campus, but extensive searches turned up nothing. Some investigators believe Lauren's remains may be located on a 62-acre property owned by Steven's family, but searches of that land have been inconclusive. Without the rest of her body, the family has never been able to give Lauren a complete burial. Investigators have long suspected there's more to the story than Steven admitted. His vague explanations about being in a delusional state don't align with the calculated, methodical way he planned and executed the crime. He researched trash pickup times. He purchased tools in advance. He had a master key prepared. He filmed Lauren's apartment on the night of the murder. This wasn't a spontaneous act of delusion. This was premeditated. Detectives involved in the case firmly believe they stopped a serial killer in the making. Steven's internet history, his violent fantasies, his collection of child exploitation material, and his stalking behavior all pointed to someone capable of repeating these crimes. If Lauren's friends hadn't acted so quickly when she went missing, if the trash service had arrived just hours earlier, Steven McDaniel might never have been caught, and he might have continued hunting. Lauren Giddings would have turned 40 years old this year. She should have been practicing law in Atlanta, building a career as a public defender, fighting for those who couldn't fight for themselves. She should have married David, started a family, celebrated holidays with her sisters. Instead, her family commemorates her absence. They celebrate every milestone she should have reached as if she's still with them. They organize memorial runs in her honor every year. Her sister Caitlin named her daughter Lauren Magnolia, ensuring the name lives on. Mercer University placed 2 memorial plaques dedicated to Lauren's memory. One at Mercer Law School and another on a pink bench in Washington Park, one of her favorite places to run. Lauren's family also established the Lauren Teresa Giddings Scholarship to help future law students pursue their dreams the way she pursued hers. At the law firm where Lauren briefly trained, she was known for wearing bright colors, especially pink. Her colleagues named Wednesdays Pink Wednesdays in her honor, joking that she was like Elle Woods from Legally Blonde. A close friend recalled that Lauren immersed herself in a profession known for black pinstripes, and pink was her way of saying, "Bring it on to the world." Lauren's sister Caitlin perhaps said it best when she noted that it's not like Lauren doesn't exist in their lives. She does. It's just very different. Lauren made herself hard to miss. She was unapologetic about who she was. Driven, ambitious, ready to take on anything. And her kindness, even toward someone as troubled as Steven McDaniel, should never be seen as a weakness. Her sister Sarah reflected on this, saying, "There's no story here about telling your kids to lock their doors or avoid certain neighborhoods, that you should always be nice to people. You should always be nice to your neighbors, that just because someone looks different doesn't mean they are, but in this case, he just was." 10 years have passed since Lauren Giddings was murdered in her apartment in Macon, Georgia. 10 years since Steven McDaniel, her neighbor and fellow law student, used a master key to enter her home in the early morning hours and took her life. Despite his guilty plea and life sentence, Steven continues to claim innocence from behind bars. He continues filing appeals. He continues seeking attention. But the evidence speaks for itself. The master key, the hacksaw, the surveillance video, the internet searches, the stalking, the lies. Lauren's instincts about being watched were correct. Her fears about someone entering her apartment were real. She tried to protect herself. She reached out for help. She did everything right. But she was living next door to a predator who had been planning, watching, and waiting for the right moment to strike. Lauren Giddings was just 27 years old when she died. She had her whole life ahead of her, and the person who took that from her is exactly where he belongs, behind bars, for the rest of his life. The truth in this case didn't stay buried, and neither will Lauren's memory. If this case made you think about how the people closest to us can sometimes be the most dangerous, hit that like button and subscribe to Classified Crimes, because here, we uncover the truth they tried to hide, and we make sure the victims are never forgotten. The truth is always darker than you imagine, but it's always worth finding.